He's talking about the outset of this enigmatic world, this world that we live in, this material creation. I think I'll read from the break. At the outset of this enigmatic world, which seems at once an enormous brute machine and a slow unmasking of the spirit in things, in this revolving chamber without walls, in which God sits impassive everywhere, as if unknown to himself and by us unseen, in a miracle of inconscient secrecy, yet is all here his action and his will. In this whirl and sprawl through infinite vacancy, the spirit became matter and lay in the whirl, a body sleeping without sense or soul, a mass phenomenon of visible shapes, supported by the silence of the void, appeared in the eternal consciousness and seemed an outward and insensible world. There was none there to see and none to feel, only the miraculous inconscient, a subtle wizard skilled, was at its task, inventing ways for magical results, managing creation's marvelous device, marking mechanically dumb wisdom's points, using the unthought, inevitable idea. It did the works of God's intelligence, or wrought the will of some supreme unknown. Still, consciousness was hidden in nature's womb. Unfelt was the bliss whose rapture dreamed the worlds. Being was an inert substance driven by force. At first was only an etheric space. Its huge vibrations circled round and round, housing some unconceived initiative. Upheld by a supreme original breath, expansion and contraction's mystic act created touch and friction in the void. Into abstract emptiness brought clash and clasp. Parents of an expanding universe in a matrix of disintegrating force, by spending it conserved an endless sum. On the hearth of space, it kindled a viewless fire that, scattering worlds as one might scatter seeds, whirled out the luminous order of the stars. An ocean of electric energy formlessly formed its strange wave particles, constructing by their dance this solid scheme, its mightiness in the atom shut to rest. Masses were forged or feigned, and visible shapes. Light flung the photon's swift revealing spark and showed in the minuteness of its flash imaged this cosmos of apparent things. Thus has been made this real, impossible world, an obvious miracle or convincing show. Or so it seems to man's audacious mind, who seats his thought as the arbiter of truth, his personal vision as impersonal fact, as witnesses of an objective world, his erring sense and his instrument's artifice. Thus must he work life's tangible riddle out in a doubtful light, by error seize on truth, and slowly part the visage and the veil. Or else, forlorn of faith in mind and sense, his knowledge a bright body of ignorance, he sees in all things strangely fashioned here the unwelcome jest of a deceiving force, a parable of Maya and her might. So we'll pause there. This is one of several places in the poem where Aurobindo gives a version of creation, the process of creation, how it has happened. Each of them is different, and this one comes particularly in this context of the little mind, the little life, Martin, will you begin?
At the outset of this enigmatic world, which seems at once an enormous brute machine and a slow unmasking of the spirit in things, in this revolving chamber without walls, in which God sits impassive everywhere, as if unknown to himself and by us unseen, in a miracle of inconscient secrecy, yet is all here his action and his will.
Yeah, here there's a full stop, but I think this is an editorial mistake because the sentence isn't finished. There should be a comma here, no? And then the next 3 lines complete the sentence. So please read the next 3 lines as well, Martin.
In this world, a sprawl to infinite vacancy, the spirit became matter and lay in the world, a body eating, without sense or soul.
That is a complete sentence. At the outset, at the beginning, the start of this enigmatic world, this world which is an enigma, a puzzle, a riddle, difficult to understand, especially because it seems we see it in contradictory ways. Sometimes it just seems, and many philosophies have described it as an enormous brute machine. It's just a mechanism which goes on and on and on under its own force, no? That's one way of looking at it. But another way of looking at it is of a slow unmasking of the spirit in things. We can think of evolution like this, that the evolving process of appearance of more and more complicated, complex forms that are more conscious. All this is as if the spirit is slowly removing its mask and revealing itself to us. No? And then Aurobindo describes it as a revolving chamber without walls, as if the whole universe is a vast room in which we can move around, and it is moving around. It's always revolving, cycling, whirling, but there are no walls, there are no closures to it. And here God is sitting within this chamber, this revolving chamber. He's sitting everywhere in it, in every part of it. Impassive. He doesn't seem to have any feelings or emotions about it. There's a vast equality, impassivity. No? And he sits there as if he is unknown to himself, as if he doesn't know who he is. No? And we don't see him, we can't see him. His existence seems to be, or his existence in the material universe seems to be a miracle of inconscient secrecy. Secretly, he's here in this apparently inconscient world, this world of matter without consciousness. And yet, everything here depends on his action and his will. So if we look out into the universe now with these wonderful instruments that have been invented, we can see it as a whirl and a sprawl. It's spread out through infinite vacancy. There's no end to it. In this revolving chamber, the spirit became matter and lay in this whirl and sprawl, spread itself out. A body sleeping, insentient, without senses, apparently without any soul, just body, just matter, just a physical manifestation. Sudarshan.
A mass phenomenon of visible shape, supported by the silence of the void, appeared in the eternal consciousness, unseen, an outward and insensible world. There was none there to see and none to feel, only the miraculous inconscient, subtle wizard still was at his task, inventing ways for magical results, managing creation's marvelous device, marking mechanically down wisdom point, using the untaught, inevitable idea. A deep birth of thought, intelligence, or lawful blessing of some supreme unknown.
Thank you. So this physical universe seems to be full of visible shapes, bigger or smaller. And they are just floating, supported by space, by the emptiness. He says this manifestation appeared in the eternal consciousness. The eternal consciousness must have been aware of this appearance, of this appearance that seems an outward and insensible world, a world without senses, purely physical, with no living senses. So in that condition, at the outset of this world, there was no conscious being to see, none to feel. What was there? This miraculous inconscient. Which acts like a wizard, does magic, a subtle wizard skilled, and it was doing its work. Matter was doing its work, organizing itself into first very, very primitive particles, and then more complex ones, and finally even forming stars that are visible. This all seems to have gone on without any apparently conscious intent. The inconscient was doing all this, managing, organizing this marvelous dance of tiny little particles which the creation consists of. Mechanically, without consciousness, marking certain important, essential points that have been indicated by a dumb wisdom without any words or intention. It's making use of the unthought, inevitable idea. There must have been a conception, an idea of some kind, but it was not a thought idea. It has an inevitability about it, this idea. It's self-fulfilling. So all this apparently unconscious matter does the works of God's intelligence. That's one way that we can look at it. Or if we don't want to say it like that, we can say that it's carrying out the will of some supreme unknown, some unknown being or power. Maybe not only unknown, but also unknowable. Phenomena.
Still consciousness was hidden in nature's home, and felt was the bliss whose virtue dreamed the worlds. Being was an inner substance driven by force, At first was only an etheric space. Its huge vibrations circle round and round, causing some unconceived initiative upheld by a supreme original being, expansions and contractions, mystic acts, created touch and friction in the void, into abstract emptiness, brought clash and clasp, parent of an expanding universe, in a matrix of disintegrating force, by spending it conserved an endless sum.
Yes. So, only the inconscient was at its work. Consciousness was still hidden in the womb of nature. Nature, evolution hasn't given rise to consciousness yet in the physical world. And there's no beings with senses to feel and enjoy the bliss whose rapture dreamed the worlds into existence. Being was an inert substance driven by force. In the Indian view, these are the three fundamentals in reverse order. First, there's existence, being. In this case, being seems to be inert substance that can't move, but it is driven by physical energy, by physical force. Consciousness is still hidden. That's the second thing. Existence, consciousness, and bliss. Here, there's no conscious beings to feel that bliss. And yet, nevertheless, if the bliss hadn't been there, this world could never have been dreamed into existence. And then he gives the steps. Again, this is a kind of traditional description of the steps. Okay, first ether. This is the subtlest of the 5 elements. There was an etheric space. Ether, in the tradition, is the subtlest form of substance. So subtle that we can't detect it with our physical senses. And in fact, our physicists have been unable to detect it. And they've declared that it doesn't exist, in fact, that there's no such thing as this element which is called the ether. But Aurobindo refers to it again and again throughout the poem. So this ether, which is vibrating. Some versions say that it starts vibrating because there's a sound. The vibrations start and go on. So these huge vibrations are circling round and round. And they are containing within themselves an initiative, a will of some kind. But this is an unconceived initiative. It's not a mental intention. So there's a kind of breath. I think this is the second element, the air or the prana, which breathes in and out. So the universe also seems to expand and contract. Yeah. And this movement, this vibration of expansion and contraction, it leads to friction. Clash and then clasp. First the friction, then the embrace. These are Aurobindo words, but if in the poet Homer, the ancient Greek poet Homer, and some of the people who have followed him, ancient Greek thinkers, they've given a description which is very like this, of how first there's just a sea, an ocean of darkness. And then in it, a breath. And the breath creates friction and clasp, even love. It's the beginning of eros, it's the beginning of gravitational attraction, all this. So into that abstract emptiness, these movements brought clash, friction, and clasp. And this whole movement, this breath, these vibrations, give rise to, give birth to an expanding universe that is held, contained within a matrix, a womb of disintegrating force. This is the modern explanation that all this is actually disintegrating, that everything comes into existence through disintegration, entropy. That's how our modern physicists describe this whole process. But this, in this matrix, he says, by spending, by spreading or using up energy, still it manages to conserve an endless sum. Matter can neither be created nor destroyed. It doesn't become more or less. Of course, later on he says this is the way that human beings are thinking about it. But perhaps there is some kind of symbolic truth in the way that we also think about this. Dana. Oh, it's Bhuvana's turn, sorry, yes.
From the earth of space it kindled a wingless fire that, scattering worlds as on my scattered seas, whirled out the luminous order of the stars. An ocean of electric energy, formlessly formed, its strange wave particles, constructing by the dance this solid scheme. Its mightiness in the atom shut to rest, masses were forged or painted and visible shapes. Light flung the photons swift, radiant spark, and showed in the minuteness of its flash, imaged this cosmos of apparent things.
Yes. So after ether and air, there is fire. And with fire comes, although he says the first form of fire was invisible, viewless. Fire, energy, heat perhaps. That vibration created this invisible fire on the hearth of space in the emptiness. And that fire, that invisible fire, scattered worlds as one might scatter seeds. So the stars come into existence. And we are told that it's in the stars, in the viewless fire, or that fire that eventually becomes visible, that all the elements of matter are created in succession from the simplest to the most complex. So this has whirled out that luminous order of the stars. Light comes. There's this, the whole universe becomes an ocean of electric energy with all the atoms and subatomic particles and everything in it. We don't know what form they have, but they formed, and what appear to us as waves, particles, particle waves, wave particles, we don't know which they are, but somehow by their dance they build up for us this solid scheme, this scheme which we perceive as solid matter. No? The greatness of that force, that incredible ocean of electric energy, is enclosed in the atom.
Shraddhavan?
Yes?
An ocean of electric energy is Agni in the seven river. I read in Secret of the Vedas, Aurobindo express Agni in the light, seven sisters.
Yes, certainly. Agni is the fire, and so it also gives rise to light and power and atomic energy and all these things. No? It's a very interesting talk with Sri Aurobindo of Pavitra, Conversations with Sri Aurobindo, where he speaks about the three types of fire. You can have a look for that. Yeah, you must have that. Yes. Yeah. So in this way, masses of all kinds were forged, were created, or maybe only pretended, feigned, presented as an illusion. Visible shapes, and light appears. Nowadays, the physicists tell us that light exists because of minute particles of light, or photons. The swift, revealing spark of these minute energetic particles, revealed in them although its flash is so minute, it enabled the appearance of an image of this world which seems so real to us, which seems so miraculous, so impossible. No? An obvious miracle. The existence of our universe is indeed miraculous. Or, if you're a skeptic, you may say, well, it's all just an illusion. It's just a convincing show. These are ways in which man's audacious mind tries to understand the universe. Dana.
Thus has been made this real impossible world, an obvious miracle or convincing show. Or so it seems to man's audacious mind, who sees his thought as the arbiter of truth, his personal vision as impersonal fact, as witnesses of an objective world, his erring sense and its instruments are his own.
Yeah, so he's pointing out how daring we are, maybe impudent, we human beings with our minds, audacious. Now, how do we dare to think that we can understand all this? And we think that what we think, he sees his thought, our thought, as the arbiter of truth, what decides what is truth. No. An arbiter is somebody who decides. If there's a dispute of some kind, he's the one who says, no, this is right. So we seat our reason as the arbiter of truth. And the way that we individually, our personal vision, our personal understanding, we treat it as if it were impersonal fact. No? And we really believe in the information that our senses give us. We trust our senses as witnesses that they're telling us about an objective world, a world that really exists. It's extremely doubtful that the world really exists the way that we perceive it with our senses, but we are utterly convinced. You know? Aurobindo says his erring sense. The senses are giving us misleading information. And our instruments, the organs which give us or transfer to us sense impressions to our brain, those instruments are also quite unreliable. We don't see things as they really are. Sarojini.
Thus, most is what light can she read it out in a doubtful light by error says unto and soon part the mistakes and the will, or else for long of faith in the mind and sense. This knowledge, the bright body of ignorance, he sees in all things when he present her.
Here.
The unwelcome just of a disciplined force.
Parable. A parable.
Of Maya and God might.
Yes. So Aurobindo says we have to rely on our senses and our reason and our thought power. We have to use that as a tool to try and understand this riddle, this tangible riddle, this riddle of matter in the physical world. The light that we have, the light of understanding and consciousness that we have is doubtful, but nevertheless, even if we make mistakes, through error, we have to find out the truth, seize on truth, and slowly we can remove the veil of illusion and distinguish the face which is behind, the truth which is behind. No? If we don't do that, if we think that we can't have any faith at all in our mind and our senses, then we land up not really knowing anything, that whatever we think we know is just a bright body of ignorance, of not knowing. And all we can see in the world, whatever all these magical forms are, he sees it as a kind of joke, a practical trick which is being played on us by a deceiving force, a force which is deliberately misleading us. It's a kind of parable or story of Maya, of illusion. The might, the power of Maya, of illusion. that's not much to rely on. But this theory of Maya, that all this is an illusion, in fact, has been quite powerful in the history of Indian thought, in the history of Indian attempts to understand what is reality. I think that's a good place for us to stop today.
Meaning artifice.
Sorry?
Meaning of artifice.
Artifice. Artifice is something that makes things that are artificial.
And forlorn.
Forlorn. We're lost. Lost. If you're forlorn, lost, you don't have any faith. You don't in mind and sense. So you're lost. What are you going to trust in?
Here he says, by error, seize on truth.
Yes, we start by error, but somehow we do manage to seize on something that at least temporarily serves us as a guiding truth, and that will lead us to another one and another one.
This is the mind of the error of the mind, or?
Yeah, it's the general inadequacy of human consciousness. And yet we have to. That's our role at this stage in evolution, that we have to use whatever means are available to us at present. But we shouldn't delude ourselves that this is a definitive explanation. It sounds quite convincing. It corresponds to some of the statements that are made to us by our physicists and cosmologists and so on. But it may be only a way of looking at it.
Shraddhavan, on page 115, parent of an expanding universe.
Yes.
Who is parent?
It is this, it's only one parent, no? It's this expansion and contractions mystic act. So there's a process of expanding and contracting. That is the parent which gives rise to touch and friction in the void.
At the outset of this enigmatic world, which seems at once an enormous brute machine and a slow unmasking of the spirit in things. In this revolving chamber without walls, in which God sits impassive everywhere, as if unknown to himself and by us unseen, in a miracle of inconscient secrecy. Yet is all here his action and his will. In this whirl and sprawl through infinite vacancy, the spirit became matter and lay in the whirl, a body sleeping without sense or soul, a mass phenomenon of visible shapes, supported by the silence of the void, appeared in the eternal consciousness, and seemed an outward and insensible world. There was none there to see and none to feel, only the miraculous inconscient, a subtle wizard skilled, was at its task, inventing ways for magical results, managing creation's marvelous device, marking mechanically dumb wisdom's points, using the unthought inevitable idea. It did the works of God's intelligence, or wrought the will of some supreme unknown. Still consciousness was hidden in nature's womb. Unfelt was the bliss whose rapture dreamed the worlds. Being was an inert substance driven by force. At first was only an etheric space. Its huge vibrations circled round and round, housing some unconceived initiative. Upheld by a supreme original breath, expansion and contraction's mystic act created touch and friction in the void. Into abstract emptiness brought clash and clasp. Parent of an expanding universe in a matrix of disintegrating force, by spending it conserved an endless sum. On the hearth of space it kindled a viewless fire, that, scattering worlds as one might scatter seeds, whirled out the luminous order of the stars. An ocean of electric energy formlessly formed its strange wave particles, constructing by their dance this solid scheme. Its mightiness in the atom shut to rest. Masses were forged or feigned, and visible shapes. Light flung the photon's swift revealing spark, and showed in the minuteness of its flash imaged this cosmos of apparent things. Thus has been made this real, impossible world, an obvious miracle or convincing show. Or so it seems to man's audacious mind, who seats his thought as the arbiter of truth, his personal vision as impersonal fact. as witnesses of an objective world, his erring sense and his instruments' artifice. Thus must he work life's tangible riddle out in a doubtful light, by error seize on truth, and slowly part the visage and the veil. Or else, forlorn of faith in mind and sense, his knowledge a bright body of ignorance, he sees in all things strangely fashioned here the unwelcome jest of a deceiving force, a parable of Maya and her might.